Well, Rain, congratulations, first of all, on season one of Razor Tongue. I was completely gripped and hooked by it, and I'm very excited that there is going to be a season two. And we got a flavor of that at Outfest at the Trans and Non-binary Summit over the weekend. Uh, First of all, just what was it like to take part in that live table read? Because as an audience member, it's great to witness, but what was it like to be part of from your point of view?
It was really fun. I was nervous at first because it's always nerve-wracking to put your work out there, especially if you're still workshopping it. And I was also just, yeah, so I was nervous because it was the first time we were reading it out loud to, like, strangers and a group of people. And I was just kind of, you know, um, uh, yeah, like, just thinking about what someone might take with a character like Belle, being as, um, just she's a little out there now, with season two. So yeah, it was a little nerve wracking, but it was also really really fun. I have to say, I had so much fun with the cast, and very honored that they agreed to do this and indulge me with their presence and their talent. And they're all friends of mine as well. And so um, we have a tremendous amount of appreciation for one another, and we support each other um, in so many ways. And so for them to show up that day in support of me and the project, and but also like really kill it in the reading, was really really meant a lot to me. And I walked away feeling so much gratitude and grace.
And just sticking with that day briefly for a moment, like how vital do you think it is for an event like that for Outfest to put on a trans and non-binary summit for a sort of whole day of programming to kind of showcase creators and to create a sort of forum for discussion as well?
I think it's really important. My career, I don't know if would have necessarily happened without Outfest, because they showcased my very first short film that I wrote, co-directed, and starred in. It was called Ryan's. And so, they've supported me from the beginning. And I remember the first trans non-binary summit was maybe 2016 or 2017, and it was the very first time they've ever done it. And I spoke on a panel, and I remember thinking, this is amazing, because we really got to talk about certain things about the industry and our challenges as creatives that we don't normally get to address or talk about or navigate together. And so it's very important that we continue doing this, because it's still a very new Hollywood in terms of accurate representation. And we've been so focused in the past, 4 or 5 years of me starting out my career on visibility. And as much as important that is, we're just at a point where, visibility isn't really enough. And visibility, sometimes um, uh, gets a little, well, we get a little too focused on the one and the only, or well, we got to cast at least someone who's this and or who's that. We don't really think about the longevity of someone's creative pursuits, um, and on-screen opportunities. And so for me, I'm just at a point where, okay, I've done that. I've worked as hard as I could to be as visible as out there, and I'm not the only one who's been doing it. But now I'm at a point where, well, how can I keep going, and how can I ensure that we create built-in reinforcements so that we get to keep doing it again, and that I get to keep creating and writing and acting. And it's not solely focused on my gender identity or my transitional stage of my life. I have so much more to say and so much more life experiences that I want to share and that I want to write about. Um, that's actually very, very universal and not niche as most people think about it. And so for me, it's important that the Trans Summit, the Trans Non-binary Summit continues to grow and get bigger and evolve as we, navigate this industry and grow with it. And this year was great because, we had just experienced a pandemic. We're still experiencing it. And so I was really excited to see my community again. I was really excited to see what everybody was working on and what kind of stories that they were telling. And so it was great to be a part of it again this year.
Yeah. And we actually haven't spoken about Razor Tongue yet. So if you don't mind, if I could just take you right back to kind of the impetus and the inspiration for season one, as you're writer, creator, showrunner, and star as well. But in terms of that writing, just give me a little bit of an insight into how it came about.
Gosh, there's so many inspirations, and I've talked publicly about how the hashtag Me Too movement kind of jump started the anger and the rage that I was experiencing at the time, and was kind of coming to terms with my own complacency and how I've participated in allowing certain things to happen to me and not sticking up for myself when I should have. So that was a big inspiration for it because I was feeling so uh, angry and rageful. But I also was inspired by the idea of a character who just spoke her mind, um, at a given time or a given moment when she's feeling, you know, microaggressions or inappropriate, comments or behavior towards her. Because more often than not, if, when something happens um, to us, we're a little bit shocked at the moment, and so we go to our car or whatever, and we drive home, and we're like, oh my god, I should have said this, and so a lot of the times um, that's something that happens to me where we should have said this or I should have stood up for myself. um, so that was sort of like the impetus for the character. But when I dived deeper, Belle standing up for herself, it was so much more than her standing up for herself. It was uh, part of what I gave her was something that was very personal to me, which I now reveal in season two, is that a part of her is standing up for her late mother. And my mother passed away when I was really young. And I remember a time when we were at the orthodontist office. I was like maybe 13 or 14, and he was being very condescending and kind of rude and talking down to her. And I remember feeling very angry because she wasn't standing up for herself. And so we got to the car, and I was like, why didn't you do anything? Why did you let him talk to you that way? Um, so I didn't really understand it at the time. But then I remember she was just like, well, do you want braces or not? And quickly explained that she did what she had to do so that we can get what we want. And I still didn't get it at the time until I moved to LA, and I've had to learn how to compromise my voice in order to get what I want. Then I started thinking about my mom more out in the world by herself, especially at a time where women weren't really allowed to speak up for themselves. And so here I was in LA experiencing the same kind of microaggressions and misogyny that she was experiencing. And I was having to compromise my voice so not to lose an opportunity or be seen or talked about a certain way. Um, so it, when Belle stands up for herself, it comes from a very, very vulnerable place, because she's not just doing it for herself. She's she's doing it for her late mother.
And in season one, we find out so much about your character, Belle, um, before the final episode comes around. And then she mentions during quite a heated sort of interview that she's trans. And I just wondered how intentional it was to sort of wait for that final episode, and whether perhaps you considered not kind of bringing it into season one at all.
I did consider not bringing it to season one at all, but I also strategically wanted to show a different kind of trans narrative that we're so used to. We're so used to a trans character coming on screen and revealing their trans identity within the first 5 minutes of their screen time. And then the story becomes about that. That it's part of the episode, or it just becomes part of who they are in the show. So I wanted to show a different way of telling a trans narrative story, where you can actually, you know, fall in love with a character, dislike a character, find the character to be really messy, and relate to the character because of all of these things. Um, and not really know how they identify until a lot later. So I wanted to kind of prove that it can be done. And I think initially when I first sent out the scripts to people, I did get a little bit of a pushback, and um, got some comments about, well, shouldn't she say she's trans in the first episode so that we know? And I'm like, I don't think that we need to, because the first episode is not even about that. It's about how she's constantly being exoticized in the world. And so I wanted to just focus on that, and focus on how she sort of navigates the world just as a woman. And then we find out, towards the end, that she's navigating the world in many different intersections of her existence. Um, so very, very intentional on my part, and I'm glad that I did keep it at the end, because I thought that it was really important, and that people would get a better understanding of where she's coming from, and why she's so vocal and rageful. Because as an Asian American myself, and as a trans woman, I'm always expected to have a certain amount of respectability politics, or know when to keep my mouth shut. Um, so Belle doesn't have any of those limitations, which makes it so fun to play and so fun to write.
Yes. And speaking about that kind of respectability politics, touching on what you were saying earlier about moving beyond visibility and beyond representation, hopefully it's allowing for a character like Belle that's with more nuance and more layers, and so much more beyond the fact that she just, kind of happens to be trans. And it kind of made me think of, well, we had 6 seasons of Sex and the City and movies, and really Carrie Bradshaw at the center of that. I rewatched it again recently, just to pick one example, but she's a pretty flawed character, very neurotic, and you know, and no one batted an eyelid at that. Whereas you said, you had some pushback. So I think that it is an important part of kind of moving forward, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, um, there's so many protagonists, particularly white and cisgender, that get away with so many things, that get to be really messy, be really privileged, be very narcissistic, and bitchy and whatnot. And we kind of fall in love with those characters anyway, and we kind of see them grow, especially if it's like a romantic comedy. The character doesn't start out perfect, right? They started to be very selfish and focus on their high powered job or career or whatever, and then we kind of fall in love with them throughout the film or throughout the series. Um, I've personally been never given that kind of opportunity yet. And but it's some of those roles that I've always knew that I can play and really tackle and make it my own. And so, creating Belle was really fun because it was just this character that I never really thought would uh, ever be written for me. And so I kind of had to take it, take the responsibility of creating something that I knew that I could do. So yeah.
Yeah, and that people wanted to see, obviously, as well. And you got your Emmy nomination for it. So
Yeah.
congratulations on that. And I don't know, what did that mean to you for your performance as Belle? What did that mean to you and for the show?
Oh gosh, it meant so much. I wasn't expecting it. I mean, you dream about those moments, and you hope that one day you get recognized in that regard. And so when it happened, it was completely unexpected. I cried a lot that day. I was shaking a lot that day. Um, I think the thing that I took away the most was how it made me feel so validated, how it made me feel so seen, and it kind of um, helped with uh, the imposter syndrome and the second guessing of am I doing the right thing? Do people even know that I'm talented? Do people think I'm talented? It kind of allowed me to quiet that part of my mind and continue to focus on what I had already started with Razor Tongue. So it was a huge um, just it was a wealth of emotions going on because I felt like I was finally being seen by my industry and by my peers. When there was a time when I didn't even know if anybody even noticed me, and so to be noticed for something that I created is you know a win in itself, but to be nominated in this in such a prestigious landscape um, was the kind of acknowledgement that I think a lot of our community really really strive for, because as much as we say awards and nominations don't matter, when it comes to our community, it kind of does, because it it um, it tells us that our 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 voices are being heard, and that there's no better person to tell our stories but us. And so that's what I took from the nomination was being acknowledged um, for my work, but as well as, like, as a trans person and an Asian American, woman, that we were finally being seen and moving into the threshold.
Yeah. Now, tell me a little bit about your approach as a showrunner to hiring folks, both in front of the camera and behind the camera.
Um, well, I think for me, because I'm so involved with my community, or at least I try to be as involved as I can, I just know that there's just so many talented people within our communities, in front of the camera and behind the camera. So when we decided to do Razor Tongue and we were crowdfunding it, part of our messaging to get people to want to contribute to our crowdfunding campaign is that we were very, very specific about where the money was going and who it was going to and what the show was about and what it was going to represent. So the show ended up being the show ended up being 80% trans, queer, POC, and female in front of the camera and behind the camera. Um, and that was because we were very consciously aware that this was going to be a community built, self-made show, and that's something that I take pride in because, we were able to put um, friends and people we knew who were talented within our communities in positions that um, they knew that they can do, and they just needed the opportunity, and it just made the show so much more special, when we were shooting it, because there was all of these queer, trans, femme, POC and trans masculine folks on set that um, it kind of made me relax a little bit because I didn't have to explain very much. We didn't really have to talk about certain things that normally would come up in a predominantly cisgender set. So that was something that I really appreciated, was that we were able to just focus on the work because we surrounded ourselves with people who were like us.
And Angelica Ross, who was there on Saturday Outfest as part of the reading, she's come on board as executive producer and a cast member. Tell me a little bit about her involvement. Oh, and co-written an episode too. So tell me a little bit about her involvement in season 2 and what that's meant for the show kind of going forward.
Yeah. Well, Angelica and I have been friends for quite some time, and we kind of grew up in the industry together. And when we were shooting season 1, Pose was happening at the same time, and so we were sending each other a lot of love. And when she saw the trailer and sort of like the first cut of Razor Tongue, she really fell in love with it, and she was one of those people who really, really supported me. Um, and so going into season 2, we kind of caught up, and she expressed interest in being a part of it in any way. And so she had a little pitch, like, what about this? What about that? And I kind of just fell in love with the whole idea of Angelica being on board as executive producer and having a little guest star role. And I think it added to the um themes of the show that I was really wanting to explore and go into with season 2. So our writing sessions were great because we were able to dive in terms of what it was that we really want to tell with season 2, and not that it wasn't already there, but a conversation that we had already started with season 1. So she wanted to help me kind of take that conversation and take it to the next level. And so we were able to do that and get really personal, but also get really political in a way. um, but again, from the perspectives of trans women, and I think that's really important. And what I love about Belle in season 2 is she's even messier in in season 2 than she was in season 1, but she has all these other trans female protagonists that she's surrounded by, that can kind of call her out on her bullshit, or um, give her the kind of love and support that she feels like she doesn't have. And so it became a much more in-depth, personal uh, season, and that was intentional as well because season 1 we were so limited with our budget. And so um, with season 2 I kind of wrote it with having no budget in mind, and just, well, what if I had the freedom to just write whatever I wanted? So it's the episodes are a little longer, it's a bigger cast, but it's something that I'm really proud of, and I can't wait to get it on the big screen.
And one of your returning cast members is Alexandra Grey, and she spoke after the reading during the Q&A session about it being actually the first time that she portrayed a non-trans character, and how excited she was about that. And just maybe could you give us a bit of an insight into the casting, and I guess that was something that was very intentional, but just for instance, casting Alexandra in that role.
Yeah, for the Ariel character, I don't think I ever meant for that character to be trans specific. I knew that we needed Belle to have sort of this frenemy villain type of character. And when I first wrote the character, it was just about the character really wanting to be very vengeful and you know and push the buttons for their own agenda. And so I approached certain people about the role, and Alexandra Grey was one of those people. And so she really loved it, and she'd never done anything like that before at the time. And so she sent a tape, and she nailed it. She nailed the tone of the character. She nailed the tone of the show, and immediately I was like, okay, this is going to be good, you know. And it was actually both of our first times acting opposite one another. We had been friends, and we had been, supporting each other in the industry. Like I said, a lot of us have grown up together here in Hollywood when we first started out our careers. So it was our first time kind of getting in the ring and playing opposite one another. And it's I can't imagine anybody else doing that role now. She does it so well, and it's so juicy, and it's so fun, and it's and it really gives Belle something to really work with and fight for. She presents a challenge, like a intellectual challenge, which is why at the end of uh, episode 7 in season 1, we kind of see Belle trying to figure out exactly what it is that she stands for. Um, so it's been fun. It's been fun um, uh, playing with Alexandra Grey. And when I wrote season 2, I still had unlike season 1, I didn't know who was going to play the character. But when I wrote season 2, I already had Alexandra Grey in mind. But even in the first 4 episodes, which is what we showcased last weekend, there was never an opportunity to talk about the character's gender. And like in a later episode, we go a little deeper with that character, and Alexandra has more to do, and we get to learn a little bit more about her. But we never really, the way I write, it's I don't like to force things. So if it's something that comes naturally, like when Belle coming out on episode 7, like that felt natural. Like she just kind of nonchalantly said it, right? Which is kind of what I do. I nonchalantly just like mention it when it feels appropriate. Um, with Ariel, it's she's just so focused, and there's never really an opportunity to talk about that um, yet. And so there is a later episode in season 2 where we kind of address some of where her rage is coming from.
Yes, yeah. And also joining the cast, Candis Cayne and Lysette, who, as you mentioned before, quite a few people you've known for a while. Can you just maybe mention, talk about bringing them into the cast for season 2?
Yeah, well, so I knew going into season 2 that Razor Tongue was going to be a bigger show and a bigger world. And so I knew that Razor Tongue would be owned by a bigger company. So we came up with the idea of it being owned by a radio station. And I love the idea of the radio station being owned by a woman. So that's how I came up with the idea of Violet, which Candis Cayne played beautifully at the reading. And I also knew that we would be introduced to more of Belle's friends and family. And I've always wanted, Trace and I have been working together for quite some time. We worked together on Transparent, and we were working on a feature film, kind of, producing it and getting the script into really good shape. And so when I started Razor Tongue, I immediately thought of her for the character who would be like her sister, her close sister. So it was fun to write it in Trace's voice and Trace's personality. It was really fun, and she brought it to life that day of the reading, and that was actually my first time seeing her bring that character to life, and it was really, really fun. And it also added, I think, because Trace and I have such a history, it also added to the depth of emotion of what Belle was going through at that moment, especially having just been bailed out, you know. So it really helped me uh, get to that emotional state of the character, even though we were just playing and reading. It helped me get there in that one moment, um, when Trace's character was trying to get me to confide in her, and so that emotion was really real for me because, I consider Trace as a true sister, and so it made sense that she would come in and play that role, and I thought that she did wonderful. And Candice was just, I mean, it was just a dream cast. I had other people in mind for that role, and something in my head was just like, well, what about Candice? And so I just asked her, and I sent her the script, and she was totally down to do it. And um, it was it was definitely a dream come true. And just her saying those funny zinger lines, and really getting the crowd going with some of those lines was just really fun for me.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to be there. And do you have any plans sort of afoot at the moment for when you might go into production on season two?
I don't, unfortunately. And, that's a conversation that hopefully Angelica and I will start to get into uh, in the next few weeks or so. She has been busy with, her other projects, and I've been busy with another project as well. But yeah, I really don't. And that's the tricky thing about being an independent filmmaker, and you kind of have to figure it out on your own. And of course, I wrote a show with a bigger budget and a bigger cast. So in a way, I'm like, oh no, I'm shooting myself in the foot. But it's exciting. It's really nerve wracking, and I'm sure we'll figure it out one way or another. And once we get to that point, I know that it's going to be fantastic, and it's going to be an amazing ride.
Yes, absolutely. So watch this space and we will keep people updated on that. So I just have one final question for you, Rain, and it's for your favorite piece of LGBTQ plus culture, or a person who identifies as LGBTQ plus, just someone or something that's had an impact on you and resonated with you over the years, and why.
I'd have to say Candis Cayne. She is someone who um, I saw on TV on Dirty Sexy Money, and she was the most beautiful, eloquent transgender woman I have ever seen on national television, on a network show. And it was, and at the time, I was living stealth, and so I didn't. It didn't really register to me what was happening because I was living a stealth life, pursuing acting and modeling, and she was out there doing it openly. And um, so it registered years later when I finally met her, and I kind of found myself a little starstruck, and I didn't know what to say, only because a friend of mine who had invited us didn't tell me that she was going to be there. So I was kind of like, oh my God, it's Candis Cayne. Um, so seeing her on television, kind of, I won't ever forget it because I was watching it in my living room with my boyfriend at the time, who didn't know I was trans yet, and I remember seeing her looking so beautiful and sexy, and saying these amazing lines like she was part of the cast and part of the show. And um, it changed me. It made me realize that there's a possibility. Um, I wasn't ready yet at the time, but I remember thinking that there was this possibility. And the fact that she's my friend now, and then we continue to support each other, and we continue to inspire each other, is means a great deal to me.
And just listening to you, you say that just makes me think of folks watching Razor Tongue who will have the same experience watching you and that.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. Didn't have very much to look to growing up. There were a lot of negative depictions and portrayals of trans people. And so I never really knew where I would fit in this world, let alone in this film and TV industry. And so now that there's so much more of us, and I'm doing my own thing. I'm realizing that I'm doing it for my younger self as well. I'm doing it for the little girl who didn't know who to look to, and now, she can look at Razor Tongue and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty dope, And so, which is why I think Belle is again such an important character, because coming from an Asian American background, um, we're we're not taught to be very vocal, and we're we've been trained to keep ourselves small, and and again, Belle just doesn't have those limitations, and I think anybody who's seeing that can hopefully allow them to speak up for themselves too.
Rain Valdez, thank you very much, and congratulations on the first season. We're very excited for season 2. Thank you.
Me too.